Let me very briefly introduce everyone here. Let's start with you, Jean-Paul Aghetti. You are the president of Excelsium. Your purpose in this company is to provide French electro-intensive industrial sites with a stable and competitive electricity prices over the long run under a contract signed with EDF in 2010. I'll move now to Adrien. Don't hesitate to wave your hands, maybe just in case who you are. Adrien Baun, you are the Business Development Director of EXMA, a provider of floating solutions for the operation, transportation, and transformation of gas. Julien Toiti, on your left, you are the CEO of Reed Management, a new investment manager focusing on the energy, waste, and water sectors. You're also the board member of Voltalis, a leading provider of demand response technology. And live from Riyadh, hello to you, Tom Tierlink. You are the Chief Growth Officer of DataVault, whose mission is to develop data centers engineered to minimal environmental impact and optimal efficiency. And we have also the chance to have great moderators today. Let me introduce both from NATIXIS CIB, Lara Khatib, you are Regional Head of Infrastructure and Energy Finance of Middle East, North Africa, Turkey, Central Asia, and Caucasus. And we have Frank Pluta, you are Global Head of Energy Transition and Natural Resources. And the floor is yours to start with.
Okay, thank you very much, Christina. Thank you all for attending today. The topic of the panel today, to start with, is about energy-intensive infrastructure in a very specific context that we all know, that is the increased demand of electricity. We're quite happy to have a very well-balanced panel today with expertise on both the supply and the demand side. That's going to be exciting. And actually, balance will definitely be the key word of the day, because we have, for the coming years, we have on the one hand, of course, the question of the supply, with the substitution of fossil fuel generation of power with low carbon, or renewable power. And obviously, on the other hand, we have the demand that is going under a rapid increase with the electrification that is obviously driven by the decarbonization targets of all countries in the world. There's no doubt for all of us, I think, that this is going to be a bumpy road in the coming years to make it work. But there are still some signs that all that is clearly a work in progress. And before I leave the floor to Lara for the first question of the panel, I wanted just to make to give you two facts. The International Energy Agency recently released an update of their net zero roadmap. And there are two figures that are interesting here. One on the supply side. If you look at the supply side, in that particular report, you can see that there's definitely a strong growth on the solar PV front, which is definitely good news. And actually, the figures that were given by IEA showed that we are probably ahead of the targets that were defined by the net zero roadmap until 2030. So that's a good sign on the supply side. On the demand side, I think we all know that there is a rapid penetration now of electrical vehicles. And I think in 2023, it's something like 1 out of 5 cars sold in 2023, so massive amount. So good signs and opportunity for us to be optimistic on the way in the energy transition. And without further ado, Lara, for the first question.
Thank you, Frank. Just to continue on the theme, to achieve the full decarbonization benefits of electrification envisaged in the net zero pathway, electricity generation needs to shift to low carbon sources such as renewable energy. Power grids will also need to expand their capacity and flexibility to accommodate the growing increase in the demand for electricity. What is the role of nuclear power? What is the role of gas, of new energies to deal with the increased demand of electricity? How can we make energy-intensive infrastructure, such as digital infrastructure, more sustainable and efficient? How can we use technology and artificial intelligence to optimize power usage, and how important is it to support further electrification? These are all topics we will discuss with our panelists today. Let's start first of all with the nuclear power, which remains today an important source of power, with providing 10% of global electricity generation and almost 70% in France. As renewable energy still presents today its challenges due to intermittency, supply chain disruption, some technical issues, and the need to heavily invest in power grids. Jean-Paul, how do you see the role of nuclear power in the coming decades in the energy mix alongside low carbon, other sources of low carbon and renewable energy? And how important is this role for the electro-intensive industry that you support?
Thank you, Laura. First of all, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I would like to precise, I'm not a financial expert, but an electrical one, so nobody is perfect. And sorry for this. I would like to say, as an electrical engineer, and regarding my experience, I have been working for 34 years, on the consumer sides, first of all, Pechiney, then Alcan, then Rio Tinto, in Aluminium Dunkirk, and for the electro-intensive consumers. In an electrical system, to run an electrical system, especially these days, when you want decarbonized electricity, decarbonized power, so there is not many solutions. In fact, to have controllable power, because you need controllable power to run electricity, because it's very difficult to store electricity. You have reservoir, maybe you have batteries, but this is mainly difficult. So you need a power plant which is able to run from the 1st of January to end of December at the same rate. And to do that, and controllable power, that means you will be able to reduce or to increase the production of the power plant. There is only two solutions. There are only two solutions for decarbonization. Coal and gas power plants with CCS. CCS is a technology which seems to be difficult to implement. And secondly, nuclear power. You have on the other side, and for sure, photovoltaic, solar, wind, offshore and onshore winds, but this type of technology are intermittency. So for me, there is an adequacy between electricity and production. And for me, the main issue, and it is about nuclear. The problem of nuclear, it's costly, and you need a long time before producing power. If you take the example of Flamanville 3, even of Kyoto 3, they started in 2007, and there is no production from Flamanville 3. That means a lot of cost of interest, and without cash generation. So the question mark for you, financial experts, is to be able to reduce the cost of capital, to be able to finance these kind of assets. The best example I can say around the world about nuclear is Karba, the nuclear power plant in Middle East, which was produced in a good time and at a good price. And so the question is how to duplicate such a successful event in Europe, even in the US, because as you know, in the US it's very difficult to build a nuclear power plant, and the AP1000, maybe it's only the test period. So the question mark to finance nuclear is about the timing and how to reduce the cost of capital.
But is it about size as well? What do you think about SMRs particularly?
SMR for me is the best example, because we are in decarbonization, in the energy transition, and I was this morning at RTU, the French TSO, in Paris, and they spoke all the time we need electricity, we need electricity, we need electricity, electricity to produce hydrogen, electricity to do something. But there was nothing on heat. And we need it for electricity, for process, we need it for household. And I think the best way to combine power and heat is the SMR, because it's kind of CHP, cogeneration. This is the first point. In terms of efficiency, cogeneration, you have 85% of efficiency. A nuclear power plant, even a coal power plant, it's only 35%. So this is a big difference. You can use the heat produced by the SMR. This is the first interesting thing. Then you could have decentralized assets to avoid big infrastructure on electrical lines. So for me, the problem in France, especially in Paris. In Paris, you have, we are Colbertist. There is Paris and nothing else. I am coming from province in the Alps, and I convinced about decentralization. And for me, the best way to decentralize and to have a stable power, controllable power, and to optimize in terms of efficiency, is clearly SMR solution.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Paul. Before we get to the SMRs, because again that's going to take some time. I think one of the questions we should ask ourselves is about the role of natural gas, and that's going to be a question for Adrien on that one, because clearly we can see that natural gas is right now a transition energy that we all need, and that helps to monitor the intermittency until we have nuclear everywhere, but that's probably not going to happen soon. So how do you see the role of natural gas in the coming, I would say 10 to 20 years? Because the question is also about timing for natural gas.
Okay. I'd first like to start with thanking Jean-Paul, because he is making my life easier for the narrative for gas. But indeed, it's all about intermittency, and that's where we see natural gas, and where I see natural gas basically playing a fundamental role in being the backbone for the energy transition and enabling the investment in renewables. And I think natural gas is the natural partner to provide reliability to the renewables revolution that we're seeing today. Nuclear versus gas. I think still there gas has an important role to basically take away the intermittency of the renewables versus the base load that you have on nuclear. So there, that's I think a nice match. And of course, I think everyone will agree that the energy system of tomorrow is one that will be a lot more complex than the one that we see today. But I'm deviating a little bit. On natural gas and its role and how long it still has a role. We are at an infrastructure conference, and we've heard already from Mohamed, from many people present here today. It's about long-term investments. It's about finding capital and finding partners that are willing to take a view for the long term. Today we need reliable sources of energy, reliable sources of electricity, especially with the electrification that Jean-François also already mentioned earlier. So we will need gas for the decades to come. If you know that an infrastructure investment needs about 20 years at least to basically make sense, then you quickly end up into the 2050s. So I think from that perspective, it makes it already quite clear that gas will be there for the longer term. Not to mention the fact that we also need sources and a diversified source of energy in a context of a lot of geopolitical tensions that we see today. Only this weekend is a good example of that, unfortunately. So I think betting on multiple horses is the way to go, and gas is definitely one of those, from a reliability, but also from a security of supply perspective.
And Adrien, in your view, does it act as a bridging ingredient in the hydrogen revolution? that we're seeing?
That's definitely yes. I think in a first instance, obviously LNG and natural gas can play a role in kickstarting the hydrogen economy in a combination with CCS, although on the political level this is not necessarily very much favored at the moment. And then on the real hydrogen side, I think a lot of focus is currently with ammonia. XMAR and basically, I haven't introduced XMAR, but XMAR is today the largest transporter of seaborne ammonia. We transport 25% of global seaborne ammonia. We see a lot of challenges with ammonia, especially with ammonia as an energy carrier. Ammonia on an ammonia carrier as propulsion, I think makes a lot of sense, but having ammonia as a source of energy for basically fueling a cruise vessel is something we would not really like to see, to be honest. So yes, where does LNG then have a role in the hydrogen economy? I think there is a lot of interest now also in synthetic LNG. Looking at e-methane, the famous Sabatier process, where you basically combine H2 with CO2 and try to create a closed loop. We are a strong believer of that. That's where we see basically LNG play a bridging role. And of course, all of the infrastructure investments are not lost. If you build a port, if you build storage tanks, if you build pipeline infrastructure, all of these things can in some way, shape or form be reused for hydrogen, ammonia, or synthetic methane.
Very clear, thank you, Adrien. So we've discussed supply, now we can maybe kickstart the discussion on the demand side. In particular, data centers. Data centers play a fundamental role in our economy, in our society today. We're shifting more and more every day to a more digital economy, yet they are energy-intensive infrastructure with a very heavy carbon footprint. The International Energy Agency estimates that by 2025, 20% of the power supply, of the global power supply, will be consumed by data centers. Tackling the supply issue is not enough. If electricity demand continues to soar in the coming decades, operators of energy-intensive infrastructure will need to play their role too in the net zero path. Tom, my first question to you. How do you see the contribution of sustainable and efficient data centers to the net zero path, and what are the challenges that you expect to face?
Okay, thank you, Lara. I mean, clearly, this is a challenge, right? Because data centers today are a big problem. They are huge energy consumers, as you said. You gave the example 1%. You know, in some countries like Ireland, for example, it's about 20% of the total power generation in Ireland that is consumed by data centers, which is an enormous amount. Some people told me that if the big tech companies would want to do everything they want and they're able to implement in a couple of years, they would need power. Data centers would need the entire power generation that is being generated today. So it's really enormous. Maybe just a quick reminder: what is a data center? A data center is actually basically a warehouse that is stacked with servers like you find in your laptop, but of course a massive amount of servers. Those servers consume a lot of power, so they need a lot of power. Just like your laptop, that power that is consumed is actually converted into heat. That heat needs to be cooled in order to avoid that those servers start melting. And that cooling process again requires a lot of power again. It's a problem that is increasing very rapidly because, you know, as we heard before and as said before, there is a massive increase of data consumption. There's a massive increase of data generation. There's a massive increase in processing. Just last year, there was about 10 trillion gigabyte of data that was created, that was processed. Within 2 years, by 2025, it is expected that this will double, and that could even be more. And all of that, all data have to pass through data centers. So that means, again, power consumption. That power obviously is not only sustainable, it's not only green power, it's not only renewable power. The majority of the data centers are today powered by grid power. That includes, comes from coal power generation, gas power generation, and so on. So huge problem, but what can we do in order to make data centers more sustainable, right? First of all, of course, there is making those data centers more efficient, because as we all know, the electron that emits the least carbon is the electron that is not being consumed, and therefore the electron that is not being generated. There are a lot of efforts have been done on making data centers more efficient, both on the server side, but also on the cooling side. We can see over the last years there's a little bit of a plateauing in the efficiency gains that are being done, but I believe there's still quite some room for efficiency gains, both on the server side and on the cooling side. Two, of course, it is powering those data centers with more renewable power. There are a number of companies, there are a lot of companies, a lot of data center operators, and then particularly big tech companies who make a big push into powering the data centers with renewable power, be it green power that is being renewable power that is being bought from the grid, wheeling over the grid, centralized power, direct connection to the data centers. It can be, we have to install batteries, hydrogen fuel cells, other storage mechanism, and probably also a discussion should be had on small modular reactors. Another contribution that data centers can make is being actually an integral part of the grid. Data centers need a very high availability. That means there's a lot of redundancies that are being built into the data centers, and data centers can actually, at certain points in time, use those redundancies in order to inject power into the grid, particularly if that power is also generated in a sustainable way. But I think the most important contribution actually of data centers going forward towards a zero net world or zero carbon world is the fact that data centers are enablers of artificial intelligence, right? Now, artificial intelligence comes with a couple of risks that need to be managed, that needs to be regulated, but artificial intelligence will come with a number of solutions, right? Climate change is very much a scientific issue, and with the advent and with the development of artificial intelligence, I do believe that we will see new breakthroughs in forms of renewable energy. We will see breakthroughs in ways to fight climate change and also to deal with the consequences of climate change.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for that. Julien, question for you. And actually, I had a very specific question, but I'm not going to ask it. I'm going to ask another question that is more general, because as we can see from this first comments on the difficult task to balance the supply and demand sides, there's not one single option to make it work. So as an investment manager, how do you see, and particularly as you are establishing something right now, how do you see the mix? What is the best mix for you, and where are you going to invest, basically?
So first, thank you very much for this invite and for the quality of what you're putting together. I think it says a lot on the way you work at NATIXIS with your clients, by the way. But
I did not ask for it.
No, I know, but
that was not organized.
That's my comment. I often say that as investors, we have a luxury compared to governments in the sense that we can pick. And what is very complex here is the system shift. And we know that some very good choices today can be very, very bad in a few decades, if not years from now. I'm sorry to put it that way, but think of the choice Germany made in favor of natural gas and the consequences it had in 2022. And sometimes in a year, in a black swan year, you can lose the benefits of a policy you haven't developed for decades. So we have to be very humble in this industry collectively and including in terms of investment choices. Personally, as I can pick, I try to go for the solutions that are both sustainable and affordable rapidly. And the beauty of the current system in which we evolve, which is, as you said very clearly, is becoming extremely complex, is that many of these solutions exist and will coexist, as you indicated. So the question you had was on demand response and more widely on flexibility. So flexibility is clearly a topic that is of high interest to me, and that I think will be of very high interest of our investment team. If we want to be in a position to integrate a huge capacity of intermittent renewables, keeping in mind that the nuclear options we will be developing will take time, unfortunately. I mean, before 2030, basically, it will be very difficult, in particular in this part of the world, but not only, to add a lot of capacity before 2040, maybe, before 2050, hopefully. So we have to do with the penetration you indicated at the beginning, the very fast penetration of renewables, and how we can balance that. And for that, we have solutions. They may not be, all of them may not be at scale. One solution that I had the chance to invest into that was mentioned at the very beginning is residential demand response, which for me was a revolution by many standards, in the sense that it's very difficult to, normally, and I know there are many economists by background in the room, you consider demand in the short term as being totally inelastic, i.e. not sensitive to price. Actually, this is not true for industrials. I mean, demand response for industrials has existed for decades, but it's also very painful for an industrial to stop its process. That's why you need, you can do it, but when you do it, it's not a light decision to make. You can modulate a bit, but it's not a light decision to make. Demand response for residential homes, basically, is something that was considered as being impossible until recently. And that's made possible because of the data revolution and the IT revolution we've been discussing in a way. The IoT is making possible things that were totally impossible, let's say, 20 years ago. And that's very simple. Basically, instead of turning on a thermal power plant only for the peak hours, you reduce consumption at home, hopefully without impacting comfort. And that's a solution that we basically picked out of many in my previous life, and that we brought at scale with the support of seasoned entrepreneurs. And the big challenge was to make it in a way that was eventually bankable. That, I think, goes to your point at the very beginning. How do we make sure eventually that we have a cost of capital that is as low as possible? And it goes with how do you allocate risks? And in particular, there is a very strong interplay with the regulation. Sometimes the technology can be ready, the financial capacity is there, the industrial rollout capacity, that's a big topic, is there as well, but you are struggling with a legacy regulatory system that may not be adapted to the challenges of tomorrow and today.
Thank you, Julien. We discussed decentralization of power as well, nuclear SMRs, renewables attached directly to the energy-intensive infrastructure. That's a very interesting topic. Do you believe that it will also help to limit the reinforcement of the power grid that comes with large capacity centralized production? Jean-Paul?
And Julien after.
In terms of flexibility, in fact, you have two issues. The one which was represented, the short-term issue, and to have an intraday product. Question mark is about, medium term, and when you have no solar, and when you have no sun, and when you have no wind. And let me say a story. 12 years ago, I said to the head of research and development in Rio Tinto, we should develop flexibility on our process. I was part of the Rio Tinto organization, Péchinet, on the aluminum sector, and our process was, very stable to optimize and to reduce energy efficiency, to have the maximum energy efficiency, to reduce global gases, etc. And it was not flexible. And I said to this guy, so we should present and we should have a significant program how to, have a flexible process. And so we went to Montreal, and Montreal said, okay, no, we have reservoir in Saguenay, Lac Saint-Jean, in Quebec, we have a huge reservoir in the British Columbia, Kitimat, so there is no sense. And what is your business case? I said, okay, I think we will have more and more intermittency and more renewables. I don't know when, but I'm sure that you will need, flexibility and to cope with this intermittency. And in fact, if you think about, physical terms, you have three main, products which have a huge electricity intensity. You have aluminum. You need 14,000 kilowatt hours a ton to produce for a ton aluminum. You have silicon, 15,000. And the main, the highest is hydrogen, 50,000 kilowatt hour a ton. So if you are able, to use power and to store into solid products, aluminum, silicon, or glass products like hydrogen, that means your flexibility could help and you could cope with the intermittency.
Thank you. Julien, do you want to say something about this as well?
I mean, I see the time is running out, so I don't want to take too much time, but to go to your point, we need everything. The complexity is that of strengthening the grid is that you have to deal with, in some instances, local oppositions. We know how difficult it has been for Germany to connect the north to the south. Eventually they made it, but it took years. We have some stories also on this side of the Rhine, but you need also to make sure you have the full supply chain in place. I mean, today, if I take a very simple example, DSOs are under strong pressure because they need to integrate new needs, in particular EV charging. They need to integrate, to connect new capacity because most of the new capacity is at the demand, is at the distribution level, not the transmission level. And the supply chain behind, i.e. the installation companies, may not be ready to scale up. So I think what is interesting as infra investors is that we need to go deeper into the supply chain and to understand where are the bottlenecks and find the infrastructure. Because maybe a long-term contract with a DSO, so a distribution system operator, through which you make sure that they have the resources available to build the expansion of the network they need, and maybe you can finance yourself some of the pieces like the transformers, whatever. Maybe it's an interesting infrastructure model to look at. So we need to be creative in this respect because there will be zillions of difficulties. The reality of the transition is that we are facing many, many hurdles. I'm very confident in our capacity to solve them, but we need for that a lot of creativity. So sorry, you wanted to say something about it?
No, perfect. I just wanted to reflect a little bit on your comment of your earlier comment. You were saying, we have the flexibility to pick and choose and to invest in the technologies that we want. Is flexibility that we as industrials don't have. And I think it's important also for the audience to follow this is that we need not only to invest in the Internet of Things and in hydrogen, but we need to also invest in those technologies that will support that progress. And I have a couple of examples. We were working at the moment on a project in Africa where we would supply LNG for a plant that would produce alumina. Again, that's something where gas and the renewables and the transition come together. We're working at the moment on a project in Brazil where we will work as backup for renewables, a power plant that will only work 2% of the time, but that will be there to provide that base load supply or that peak load supply when it is needed with the intermittency of renewables. And I think when funds go through their reflection process and they pick and choose and they pick and choose, if they all pick and choose those projects that are attractive because they are renewable and they are they look attractive on a slide, it's important that we remember that in those strategies we need to also invest in those technologies that will support those developments, and yeah, basically that was the message.
Maybe a question to Tom. So we've discussed power grid reinforcement and decentralized power, perhaps aiding to minimize power grid reinforcement. As more economies run on electricity, grid capacity and storage infrastructure need to be scaled up. So the future grid needs to be smart, flexible, and responsive. Tom, what are your thoughts on the modernization and digitalization of electricity grids to address these challenges around increased demand for electricity?
Yeah, Lara, I mean, taking into account that we need to electrify the world as much as possible, and that's really the way to reduce the, I mean, to go to net zero. Electrification is extremely important, and therefore grids, not only grid modernization, but grid expansion is extremely important. It's about bringing the power, it's bringing the renewable power where it's most available, where it's most abundant, to the place where it can be consumed. And you see a couple of projects, you see that's the case with offshore wind. You see some projects like, for example, the X-Links project, which is a mega project, bringing renewable power all the way from Morocco through a submarine cable to the UK. You see a number of other major projects also in the world. So interconnectivity is going to be extremely important. There were some examples of some small projects or some renewable projects that are being built, but that is only used 2 or 3 or 4% of the time. If we can interconnect those projects with the grid, with a wider grid, with a regional grid, that will really help us on the efficiency. It's also about a tuning. Of course, it's very much about the tuning, and we discussed that, about the tuning the demand for power to the time of the generation of renewable power. So it's about smart meters, it's about demand response programs. It's about also integrating distributed, decentralized power into the grid. So it's really a mix of different solutions with respect to the grid. But in any event, and what was already said, it requires massive investments into the grid if we want to electrify the world, as we need to do and as soon as possible, because we know the problems that are arising already and what we see today.
Thank you, Tom. We are running out of time, but we still have time for a few questions from the audience. But before going to a question, any other comments, Jean-Paul or Julien or Adrien on this topic? So can go for a question in the audience.
So maybe first,
yep.
Something. If you can reduce your consumption of power, of heat, I think it's the best way to solve the problem of climate change. So maybe we have to change our mind.
But is it the best way, or is it unavoidable?
Stop driving, I don't know.
That's another topic for another panel.
Well, thank you very much. Great applause to you. Thank you. As we want to be on time, actually, Frank, we won't have any Q&A session, but of course you are here to answer any questions one-to-one just at the break later. Thank you again. Great applause to you. Thank you.